Okay, awesome. We are now officially live. Sauropods with Dr. Brian Curtice. Hello, everybody. It is awesome to be here. We both are super excited to be able to have this conversation with you all. Let's go ahead and get started with introductions. So, Brian, do you want to tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got into paleo?
Well, how long do you got? The short version is I'm Dr. Brian Curtice. I'm a sauropod specialist. I've liked dinosaurs since I was a fetus, seemingly. I mean, my earliest memories are of sauropods, and my parents vouched that I love dinosaurs, like many of you listening now or watching later are doing. I just love them. And every single paleontologist has their own journey to becoming a paleo person. There's no one that's followed the same path. There's different species of the same genus, but there's a whole lot of genera that allow you to become a paleontologist. And so I went through as a good student, great student, actually. It's because schools wrote memorization and I was able to memorize all kinds of factoids in time to dump them into a test. Went to college, thought all colleges were equal, went to Arizona State University as an undergrad in physical anthropology, of all things, because there's no dinosaur program at ASU. And I didn't know this. You'd think a smart guy would know that, but I didn't know anything about college because no one I knew had been. So I go to my local school, show up, and wow, did I get a great education. Physical anthro is one of the paths you'll find many paleontologists started in anthro because you get to touch human bones, but lots of animal bones. Think of bioarchaeology. When you go to a site and you find bones, you got to make sure what taxon it is. Is it a bear? Is it a boar? Is it a deer? You get exposed to a huge amount of anatomy, and you find bipedal versus quadrupedal. Anyway, we'll come back into that. So undergrad at ASU, then went on because I wanted to study sauropods. I went to my first SVP 30 years ago in 1993 in Albuquerque, New Mexico, back before the internet was really a thing. I caught wind that there was this conference the next day in Albuquerque, and I slept in the back of a fire station because I didn't have money for a hotel room, and walked into the conference and saw the man that I admired, Jack McIntosh, a nuclear physicist who is the world's sauropod authority, call him Yoda, and struck up an immediate friendship with him. He introduced me to a number of sauropod venues because not many people were studying sauropod in the early 90s. And I ended up as a non-LDS going to Brigham Young University, who had the largest unstudied dinosaur collection in the world. And what a great experience that was. 23 months of pure sauropods. I started before I walked on campus. I spent 4 months in the field at Dry Mesa Dinosaur Quarry, excavating dinosaurs. Then you just come in and you get buried in geology and all of the aspects of paleo, the concepts, evolutionary biology. It's a great program. And then went back in the field for another season, dug up another 3 or 4 months out in the field, and then went on to a PhD work at SUNY Stony Brook out in Long Island, where I went the human gross anatomy route. I discovered I didn't like cultures. I don't like rocks. So let's try anatomy. Turns out I don't like anatomy either. But I got to go travel all over the world, 6 continents. And I've been hunting. The joke is I chase tail because I'm a sauropod tail specialist on 6 continents. I'm waiting for Antarctica. So the long story short, I just keep moving forward, networking, and going and looking at bones and making sure that I touch the specimens, and that I can't emphasize how important it is to touch the actual bones. And there's lots more, but I just went on a 4-minute soliloquy and we just got this far in.
Awesome. So that is Dr. Brian Curtice, everybody. Give him a big hand.
A whirling dervish.
Awesome origin story.
I'm out of the Arizona Museum of Natural History. That's where I hang my shingle. And I run fossil crates, express exhibits, paleo portals. So when COVID shut us down for 18 months, I launched a bunch of side projects I always wanted to pursue. And those have been a lot of fun, trying to help the next generation of people become paleontologists, giving them access to professionals, to coaching, to thought processes. So I'm really trying to pay it forward as well as give back because so many people have helped me in my career.
Yeah, it's awesome. So I actually got to meet up with Brian at Southern Utah University, which is where I study. We went through the museum collections. He ID'd a bunch of crazy bones. And as a direct result of that conversation, I ended up getting an undergrad advisor, and now I'm doing a giant research project on intraspecific size variation in sauropods. So I've talked to a few of you about that and some of the things that are going to happen because of that. But Yeah, Brian's an awesome guy. Super, super cool, very friendly, as I'm sure you have all already realized.
I am so glad that that visit turned out to spin up such a cool project. And if I can help, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. I will be. I'm going to be reaching out to you, and Mike and Matt already offered to help out too, so I'm definitely going to be tapping on them. I've been talking with Nicholas Campione, with Matthew Carano, Roger Benson, whole bunch of people. So it's going to be quite the project.
Right on.
I'm
Fantastic.
super excited. Okay,
So,
so we do have a bit of an agenda that we're going to be following throughout this stream. The next topic that we're going to talk about: why sauropods? What got you into sauropods specifically? What about like Jack McIntosh and everything that he was doing
so,
caught your attention?
there's a flippant answer, and then there's somewhere in between's the truth. So the reality is from just purely, let's look at the numbers. I'm a scientist at heart. So the sauropods behind me have, let's say it's that Barosaurus. So ostensibly it has 16 cervicals. We really don't know. We don't have a complete cervical neck. I haven't articulated one all the way through cervical 8, and we might find the next 7. Stay tuned. But 16 cervicals that are big and fragile. They don't preserve really well. They get beat up. Dorsals. Baro has 9. So let's go 25 pre-sacral elements versus a cam has 53 caudals minimum. An Apatosaurus has 3018 has 82 caudals. A lot more likely to find a caudal vertebra in any quarry than any other element that you're going to find from any dinosaur. They're blocks, they're solid. And what's beautiful about the Morris information, especially, is a caudal vertebra from the caudal ribs forward. You can get it down to genus almost instantly in most cases, because each sauropod has its own tell, its own suite of unique characters. Oh, that's an Apatosaurus, that's a Barosaurus, that's a Diplodocus, it's a Brachiosaurus. So as a result, when I got into actually to selecting a research project, my master's thesis was the Codex of Diplodocid Caudal Vertebrae. And I traveled all over the world photographing and measuring all kinds of caudals, just so I could figure out and get a feel for intraspecific variation within quarries, intragenera variation, what characters move. So from the tail has extraordinary value of identifying the animals present, but it also allows you to address some really cool functional morphology questions. Is it tripodal? Or how did it reproduce? What was going on with these fantastic tails of a diplodocid with that long whip at the end? So it allows you to go from a stamp collecting alpha taxonomist, which is my favorite, to a phylogenetic systematist, coding things at 0s and 1 and getting 9,000 most parsimonious trees and picking the one that looks just like my qualitative tree that I drew by hand. And then you can get into functional morphology, biomechanics. And if you're on Paleo Portals tomorrow, we have our guest at our show, Daniel Vidal, who is going to come on and talk about three-dimensionally scanning these big animals. So I love the size. As a kid, I loved they're 3 school buses, nose to tail. I love their enormity. I love digging them up. I dug in archaeology pits, 1 millimeter, 1 centimeter. I'm scraping away. I've got 8-foot long scap coracoids. I can see those even. I don't see well, and I can spot them when I'm looking for them. And there's so many of them. And when I started, another key thing was they were unstudied. They're outside of McIntosh, no one was involved in sauropods. Upchurch, Wilson, Wadle, Wilhite, Foster, those were my buddies. These guys were coming in up through the ranks, just my time or maybe 2 years ahead of me. So from a sauropod standpoint, there was nothing. Outside of McIntosh, you had Gilmore 36 on the Apatosaurus. You had a couple of big monographs that had been written, Osborne and Mook, and that was it. There was nothing. This in the 20th, dated 2000 and X on sauropods. And in the 90s, there was nothing. It was Calvo and Salgado's matrix, and there was Upchurch's 93. But these were things that were just coming out. So sauropods, because they're big, they're easy to see. No one was studying them at the time. Now sauropods are all the rage, and everyone likes them. Thankfully, it's mostly titanosaurs and the splitters with the diplodocids. Gallimiopus, Catydocus, and about 6 more that I'm sure will be named in the next 2 years.
That's awesome. That's super exciting.
So there's so much work going on with sauropods right now. I was at BYU a couple weeks ago. We found more of the Supersaurus tail. So we have one individual, and now we've got this thing laid out. We have probably 20 plus caudal vertebrae. We have 6 of the putative 9 dorsals. We've got a half dozen cervicals. We're missing one caudal, one sacral vert. We've got 4 of the sacrals. We've got both scaps, both pubes, both ischia, some limb elements or some foot elements. We don't actually have any of the limb bones, sadly. So it's been really cool to keep going back, because the other thing is we've got the Cori maps in some of the areas now. And one of the other neat things about sauropods is a lot of them are drawn with Cori maps, and they're really beautiful, and you can go back and compare to these articulated specimens. The downside is, like you see behind me, people mount the original bone, and that's heartbreaking. So I got the opportunity to go check out YPM 1980, the Brontosaurus excelsus holotype, and see how much of that material was actually restoration. Diplodocus carnegii and Apatosaurus louisei holotypes, I looked at them when they were naked, and there's so much on there that's restoration. Haplocanthosaurus delphsi didn't have as much, but it still had restoration. So when you're doing scientific studies, there's certain opportunities that pop up that give you a chance to go back and revisit the historical specimens with the light of modernity and additional material. Because you think about it, they were making this stuff up as they went. They didn't know what a sauropod was. They had no idea. And they did their best guess. And I tell you, I'm constantly reading. People are like, do you know about whatever's going on in the world? No, but did you read that 1869 paper that von Huene wrote? I'm always going backwards. And what blows me away, and if any of you want to be a paleontologist, know your anatomy. These guys, the Richard Owen, Sir Richard Owen, the Copes, the Marshes, all of that era of paleo have an astounding knowledge of reptile, mammal anatomy. And when they would look at a bone, they could make these crazy ties. If you look at the history of the American cheetah, even that animal was initially misidentified. And then somebody looked at the tooth and said, it looks just like a puma almost. Let's go look at what these other things are. And it's because they didn't go hyper specialized in their youth. They absorbed so much anatomical knowledge. It was great. So why sauropods? They're big, they're beautiful, they're awesome. No one was studying them. I was at the largest unstudied collection of sauropod bones in the world. So they didn't care what I did. Knock yourself out, go have a ball. And I practically lived in the collection the whole time I was there. You always knew where you could find me. I even slept there, and I shouldn't say I slept there a few times, but don't tell anyone.
It's all right. Nobody's watching. We're just on YouTube.
All right. Great. Minute 13.
You mentioned paleo portals. Do you want to take a minute and talk about that?
If you don't mind, sure. So if you go to paleoportals.com/join, it's a monthly fee. So it's $10 a month, 30 days free. That means 2 visits with live folks. The reason I charge is I have a software in the back end I have to pay for. I don't pay the guests anything. We don't make any money. We just cover our expenses. But what it is twice a month, I bring on live paleontologists. So tomorrow is Dr. Daniel Vidal. I've had David Krause, Matt Lamanna, Matt Wadel, Ray Wilhite, Mike Taylor. So, it's not just sauropods, though. I've had John Foster, Rebecca Hunt Foster, Julia McHugh, but it's not just PhDs. I also bring on graduate students. Amelia Zietlau was just our guest. We bring on folks that are doing really cool work. Either a member will say, hey, I really want to meet so-and-so. Can you hook me up? And if they're one of the Paleo Portals members, I'll go see if I can bring them on as a guest. So we had some folks that wanted to do some field work, and we got some field paleontologists on, and now they're digging in the field. But we bring on guests. It's about an hour or so of a live event. We allow folks to ask questions on Zoom. So you just raise your hand, and then we call on you. And it has been an absolute honor. I think I figured it out the other day, 56 guests. So if you join, you get access to all of the prior videos as well. Plus, there's videos you won't see anywhere else, things that I've created and shot, especially for the portal. But what I've learned is people just love the live access to researchers. And the folks that are, because it's paying, it's really serious level folks, mostly high schoolers and undergraduates with some graduate students. But anyone's welcome. We've got folks from Australia, South Korea. We have folks all over Europe that join in as well. So it's truly a community where I'm trying to just help folks become a paleontologist, introduce them to people. our upcoming guest, and after Daniel, is Andre Lujan, who's a field guy who's just making a new museum, Texas Through Time. He's got a 40,000 square foot museum he's building in the next few years. He's got the building. So somebody looking to work in Texas, I got to be there 2 weeks from tomorrow. Eric Snively, Dr. Snively is going to be a guest. We just had on, he was on your show even, wasn't he?
I just had Evan
Johnson Ransom. He was on as a guest, and you just had him on your show. So it's so many cool people. It's truly a labor of love, because I get to bring paleontologists that I've known over 30 years onto a small forum where we get to have lots of cool conversations. Some of them have gone 2 hours or more. People have brought on giraffe lungs. You never know who's going to bring out the new genus that's not come out yet. A lot of folks will do reveals because they get so excited and comfortable with the group. They're like, well, you know what? Maybe you should see this pterosaur skull. And then they'll pull it out like that, and then they'll show it off.
It's pretty awesome stuff. Speaking as a Paleo Portals member, I've only been able to attend 2 meetings so far. I'm pretty new, but both of them have been absolutely fantastic, super enlightening. The networking alone is incredible. As you can see, I met Evan through Paleo Portals. Turns out he's been subscribed to the Vividen for like 6 years. He actually ended up, he told me this off the stream, he actually ended up seeking out Dr. Snively for grad school mentorship because of a video that he saw on my channel. So it's just crazy, crazy stuff. All these different connections that you can learn. Paleo Portals is a fantastic resource. If it's in anybody's budget, I totally recommend it.
And we are such a small community. The 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, it's really the 2 emails from me. I can get to pretty much anyone in the paleo world within 2 emails in almost, so far every scenario, it's worked that way. And we're, for the most part, an extraordinarily kind, giving organization when you get one-on-one. Sometimes they get, people take their ideas and hypotheses very emotionally and personally, and you'll see some great epic throwdowns. But we all just want to see cool people come forward and bring and help us build this discipline, because we're stratigraphically layered. Every generation is improving, not only on you working on the stuff we've done, but we're watching you guys bring technology in, like your channel. What an incredible opportunity to disseminate information across the world, thanks to you. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for being on the channel. We all just have a bunch of fun out here.
Love it.
Awesome. Okay, let's go ahead and move to the 3 highlights of your current work. It looks like we want to talk about 3 different sauropod genera. So there's Supersaurus, Haplocanthosaurus, and Brachiosaurus. Do you want to take a few minutes and kind of discuss that?
Yes, and I'm going to go so I'm going to jump in with Haplocanthosaurus, because when I was coming through the ranks as a graduate student, Haplocanthosaurus was this enigma outside of the holotypes sitting at the Carnegie Museum, and then the Delft's Eye, which was named after Ed Delft. I actually got to dig with Ed Delft, and he told me all kinds of great stories of being an 18-year-old with the Cleveland Museum of Natural History's money in a truck, bought dynamite. They said, go find a sauropod, and he did. And then he bought dynamite to blow the hill up so they could get the thing out of the ground and take it back to Cleveland. And then he was going to be a paleontologist. But when you found a new species, you could argue it's a new genus, but a new species at 18, he's like, well, I went and became a medical doctor because I had achieved my lifelong paleo dream. So Haplo is an animal you hear a lot about in terms of it's the ghost of the Morrison. It's this mysterious creature. So we've got a paper we just presented at MTE, Mesozoic Terrestrial Ecosystem, a couple 2-3 months ago on the dry mesa dinosaur quarry Haplocanthosaurus. We found an individual, really cool, and it's in the cervical dorsal transition. And the 2 ways you have haplo, there's 3. These dorsals with these processes that look like a saguaro. Hey, how you doing? I surrender, or give me a hug. And they're so distinct. And then the caudal vertebrae, they have these massive posterior chevron facets. So if you pick up a centrum and you see these huge facets in this certain ratio, it's haplo. And then the 3rd element is it has a wonky tibia. So we've found in a half a dozen collections the tibia with the dorsals and sometimes with the caudals. So we've got 11 localities now that have Haplocanthosaurus. This animal wasn't rare. in terms of all the quarries, which we always assumed it was. It's actually surprisingly common. It's just not in any quarries in any kind of numbers. They're one individual in almost every one of these quarries is a haplo. So it's really cool to be looking at the holotype material and reading the paper that McIntosh wrote and reading the papers that Hatcher wrote in Holland, and then discovering that there's mistakes. So even though it looks like it's settled law, Ray Wilhite pointed out a math error that Jack made, which stunned us. So we've now added a new element to the holotype. And that's really cool. My screen just went crazy. Did we lose you? Hello, hello? I'm not sure. I'm going to sit tight here and see what happens. But Haplocanthosaurus is an amazing animal. All right.
Yeah, looks like we're back. We're back.
Okay.
Just had some internet issues, looks like.
No worries. So Haplocanthosaurus is not the rare animal we thought it was. It just doesn't travel in big herds, seemingly. It may have been the loner dinosaur out in the corners. It's a cool animal. And we've got this one up that which is in Vernal, Utah at the field house. That's going to be the Rosetta Stone. When Sue Ann Bilby and Evan Hall and Paul Upchurch publish that specimen, hopefully next year, that's going to help tie together, I think, additional elements in collections that we don't know what they are. We're going to be able to say that's Haplocanthosaurus.
So you're actually going to be able to compare those diagnostic characteristics.
Yep, outside of the tibia, the caudals, and the dorsals. So the animal quickly became one of my favorites. It's not a big guy. Haplocanthosaurus delphi is much larger. So I went and looked at that. We discovered, Matt Wadell and I flew up to where they were taking it apart in Canada and found some new pneumatic characters that we had never suspected existed. And in the dorsal vertebrae. So really cool things. So what I would say to anyone is just because there's a monograph on it and there's been other papers and the cladograms have it scored a certain way, go put your own hands on it, make your own opinions, and revisit. It's called research for a reason. That means search again. So keep going back and looking, because as you go through as an actual paleontologist, you keep layering information on as well. And I've gone back and looked at things that I haven't seen in 20 years and go, wow, how did I miss that? Or, oh my goodness, I was right. I was pretty good 20 years ago. You get both ways. So it's really exciting. So I like Haplo. Before we get to the other two, the other animal that I've spent a lot of time on recently is Barosaurus. And we're actually actively describing the Museum of Ancient Life's Barosaurus that you all can see if you go to Lehigh. So
I love that museum.
Oh, it's the largest museum. It used to be in the world with casts, and I think one in China now has like one more cast. It's like there's this one-upsmanship.
By the one.
Yeah. So either way, it is gorgeous. It is beautiful. That specimen, their Barosaurus there is unbelievably complete. It's got from caudal 22 articulated all the way through cervical 8 in articulation, and it's not crushed. We're missing a few neural spines in a few places, but the pelvis is complete. We've got the limb bones that we've never had before. The animal is going to help us know so much, because Barosaurus has quickly become one of the hottest sauropods. I know of literally a half dozen Barosaurus specimens in public and commercial hands that I have personally touched that need to be in the literature. I don't know where they'll all land. I know the commercial specimens, they're trying to land them into museums, and I really hope they do, because these specimens are every bit as good as the Museum of Ancient Life. And some of them are from the same quarry. So think about that. We'll be able to now do interspecies variation on 3 uncrushed Barosaurus specimens. So lots of cool stuff out there. If you're thinking that all of paleo is done, far from it. The other reason we're all over Barosaurus right now is there's a whole new crop of Morrison formation sauropods that I can't identify based on known genera. There is an interesting suite of characters. For instance, a Diplodocus, you know it's a Diplodocus because it has holes on the side and a big hole at the bottom, and the spine's built a certain way. And now I have seen them where they've got holes on the side, but not the bottom. Well, that's not Diplodocus. Nothing named has that. or it has no holes on the side, but a deep hole on the bottom. Different animal. And this is not just on one vert, this is on a vertebral column. So it's not just variation. We know this is something different. So I'm going to Denver next week to look at 2 of these because there's other taxa. So as much as I get frustrated at the splitters naming, well, it's got 6 new apomorphies, so it must be a new genus. At the same time, we are far from having the proper diversity of the Morrison formation realized. If you think about it, it's what, 6-8 million years long of time. So there should be a lot of species and a lot of turnover. And so it's really exciting because people are out digging. They're digging in new places. They're digging in new time frames in the old places. They're digging deeper, going older, or finding bluffs above and pulling animals out. So the John Foster has really taken up the mantle of locating all of the localities and putting them in a big stratigraphic column. And so though he's an absolutely wonderful paleontologist, a great human being, he's also an extraordinary geologist. And so he's working to map. He's taken up the Peterson's work and mapping all of this. And so paleontology is truly a group effort. We need the geologists to tell us when we are. The paleontologist, was it wet or dry? Everyone was saying wet Morrison, but if you watch the last talk at MTE, the paleontology certainly does not support a wet Morrison. In fact, she had a dagger for the wet Morrison folks, which was, of course, your Morrison's wet because you're finding all the leaves next to lakes. All of your specimens are in the water. By default, it's going to be wet. She looks at places where there's no water and you get pollen, and her paleontology certainly doesn't support it to be the wet Morrison. I don't have a dog in the fight. My sauropods ate clearly. They survived. Whether
they were wet. Doing they're fine either way.
Absolutely. But I do get my popcorn out. My favorite session of the entire MTE was me sitting there, 3rd row back, just popping popcorn, watching the paleobotanist showcasing really cool things. But my crazy favorite, and she's going to be a guest on Paleo Portals probably next year, was the fistulated cow, where they had cut a hole in the side of a cow and they put equisetum, they put Araucariaceae, they put these Mesozoic plants into the cow's stomach through a hole. This is like a common thing that people do with cows in ag science. And they put them in the hole, and then they looked at the dung to see every 24 hours what came out in what condition. It was the most mind-blowingly awesome plant study I've ever seen. And I'm hoping to have her. Well, she said she'd be a guest. She's in Germany, so we got to work out a time that works 9 hours ahead. But that study was one of those crazy, are you kidding me? How cool was that? I don't want to look, but I'm watching like this because the cow didn't seem to mind. And I talked to my ag buddies, and they're like, yeah, we do it all the time. There's an entire science behind it. So you learn something new every day in this discipline.
That's pretty incredible.
So then we mentioned Brachiosaurus. We have a paper at SVP on Brachiosaurus. I think we have a new genus of Brachiosaurid. I'm not going to say any more except stay tuned.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's a new species 100%. It's just a matter of, do you name it a new genus or do you go conservative? Do you stair step into it? But it is the dorsals. It's clearly brach, but the morphology. So if you think Brachiosaurus, the holotype and the only specimen of any significance is in the Field Museum, and it's 7 presacrals, 2 caudals, a beat up pelvis, and some limb material. So everyone compares it to Giraffa titan, aka Brachiosaurus bronchi, over in Africa. And I went and looked at it, and I see why he called it Brachiosaurus. It's pretty similar, but there are enough differences. It becomes a philosophy. Are you a lumper or a splitter? And what are you trying to accomplish is almost what it comes down to. Do you name things? But this specimen, it's half a dozen dorsals, a number of cervicals, a bunch of the tail, a complete pelvis. And it's just wonky. It's clearly brach, but it is not Brachiosaurus sitting in the Field Museum. And I don't know, we're vacillating over what to do, but we're presenting on it. We're showing up a bunch of photos, images, and also, wow, I shouldn't even tell you all this. So while we were there looking for it, there's 2 other quarries that have Brachiosaurus material. So we laid out all the Brachiosaurus at BYU was laid out on the ground. It was really cool. But we were putting it all away. There's been a vertebra that was collected in 1962, and I've seen it since 1994, and it's giant. But I never actually, it's not from any of the quarries I study. I knew it was big, but it's just a centrum. So we, for fun, said, you know what? Let's measure it. Let's just do a real measure of it. And it is larger. Not that I don't want to be affiliated as the S guy, the longest, heaviest, but I have to share it. This centrum is the widest, the longest, biggest circumference just of any North American vertebra. It's not Argentinosaurus size. I've measured Argentinosaurus, but it is larger in all dimensions than the equivalent position specimens out of Oklahoma, which was the previous record holder. And it's much larger than the Supersaurus dorsals that are sitting right next to it. So we don't know what to do with it. It's just centrum, but the joke is Amphicelius fragilimus. Maybe I've got the bottom half of it. I don't know. We don't know what to do. There's more material at the site. We don't know. We decided to park it because it's just one vert. It's really a fun vert. But when you see this thing, you're just like, how in the world? This thing is gigantic. But what do you do with one centrum? And that's a problem that you face as a student and in your early career is you find all these anomalies and you wonder, should I publish on it? Should I put a little note? And shame on me for not having done that. So now we're making up for lost time. Every quarter, we're trying to put a new note or observation out. Like I'm not going to name it, but there's another animal. The Alamosaurus is not the only animal in the late Cretaceous of Texas. I'll just tell you that right now. There is another taxon walking around down there for sure. I've got proof from the same quarry, same bone, vastly different morphology, both sauropod. Not enough to name a new genus, but definitely worth a note. So I should put that out. It'd be a real quick paper. But those are the kind of things that go through my brain. I see them, I tuck them away, I talk to them with my sauropod buddies. And where I don't follow through is publishing per se. So I'm going to get better at it, I promise you.
That's pretty exciting stuff, though.
We should make announcements on our paleo portals, on Vividen, on fossil crates, put all these things out there.
Yeah, science is all about sharing information. So I think that's a great attitude to have.
I got so selfish for so many years. I'm like, and it wasn't like I was intentionally hoarding the facts. It was, I was eating the bonbons, the chocolate so much. And I just forgot that, hey, there's enough for everyone, or someone might want to try this flavor. So speaking of flavors, there's always Supersaurus. And the number one question I get asked about that beast is, why isn't it Barosaurus? So the easy answer is there's a couple. Well, one, if you look at the quarry map, all the bones are found in what I call the Supersaurus pocket. They're all in one part of this 300, this 3 football wide quarry. They're all in the one spot. And they're all in this one section. You can see there's a scapula, there's the big 9024 cervical right where it should be. There's these big dorsals that are right where they should be. All of this material to this one individual, in my opinion. Jim Jensen was not a paleontologist, not trained. He was an engineer, an adventurer, a creative person, but he didn't know paleo. So when he named Distylosaurus, Ultrasauros, and Supersaurus by himself, he didn't get a lot of input from folks. So as a result, he took one animal and named it 3 different genera in 3 different families. It happens. So then Wadle and Taylor came out with their, hey, this looks just like Barosaurus. And so there's a couple ways you can approach it. And they do a great job on one of their blogs talking about the different aspects. But if you take away the naming, that big bone goes with whatever the big scaphocoracoids, whatever the big dorsals, the big pelvis, they all go to the same individual animal. And that animal has, thanks to 2 other specimens that have been recovered, the nicknames Goliath and Jimbo out of Thermopolis. They published on it, I think, 2008 with Lovelace et al. They found another Supersaurus, and they were able to find something that I came so close to solving in my thesis, but wasn't creative enough to come up with, which was I found these gigantic Apatosaurus vertebrae. There was 4 of them. They're bigger than anything by a lot. And I said, well, this must just be part of some big Apatosaurus hanging out, and there's only 4, and it was found right at the edge of the quarry. The rest of it must have eroded away. Well, no, those are actually Supersaurus caudals. They found a Supersaurus, one animal in one quarry, and the vertebrae start off looking like Barosaurus, and the tail morphs to an Apatosaur-like tail. So I argued vehemently that they were wrong, and then I went and looked at the material and apologized profusely because they were right. And then the specimen that's in Grandview Museum in China, the one that's called Goliath, they also found one individual. If I took them all, made them black and white, and gave them to you in a mix, you wouldn't tell me which ones are from Dry Mesa versus Thermopolis versus the Grandview location. They're so similar morphologically, and it too had the caudals that started like Barosaurus, and then around caudal 10 transitioned to an Apatosaurus. And it was the wildest thing because what we talked about earlier, these new mixes of vertebral characters in the tail are coming to light. So we went back to BYU and we said, well, let's look for those. Lovelace found a bunch of them, but that was 15 years ago. There's a lot that's been prepped since then, and we found a whole bunch more. And now there's only 3 blocks left for the whole quarry. I'm predicting all 3 of them will have cervical and dorsal vertebrae of Supersaurus in it. They're right from the spot. So they're going to open one up here shortly, maybe by the time you get there. And
that'd be awesome.
Yeah, hopefully you can send me a pic if I'm not there and say, look, we found it. So Supersaurus, long, ridiculously long, big, heavy animal. The cervical vertebrae definitely have a Barosaurus feel for sure. But what's weird about it is the Distylosaurus people have argued it's not bifurcated. But when you really look up close, there's this little groove and a hint that I've always thought was bifurcation. Well, thankfully, Goliath had that exact bone based on parapophysiolocation, and it also had these little bifurcations, but it had them preserved. So I'm like, yes, that's exactly what I was looking for. So I was good to feel vindicated. So we've got an osteology of Supersaurus manuscript coming out where I talk about the history. I was given access to all the letters that Jim Jensen and Jack McIntosh wrote over 20 years about the quarry. So it's really a fascinating history watching the animal come to life. It's really cool. But Supersaurus, now that we have 3 of them, the next challenge is let's find smaller ones. Yes, we find them because, oh, it's really big. I want to find the medium size or the little kid version. And now I know what I'm looking for. And I predict if I go back through all of my old cassette tapes, my high 8 tapes, I'm going to find bones that I'm going to be able to match back. We've seen this precedence for this with Torvosaurus. When it was found, people went back through their Jurassic collections and lo and behold, started finding Torvosaurus in places because now they had a search image and knew what to look for. But the animal's fun. We also have a new genus of Diplodocus from that quarry. I dug it up in 95 and prepped it in 96. It's a whole back end with 20 caudals, the whole hind limb, and it is wonky features as well. So there's a lot of neat things that are coming out of that quarry. So expect a lot of papers in the next couple of years and some press releases on some really nicely preserved stuff.
That's awesome. The Morrison just has so much potential. It's crazy.
Oh my gosh. And it just doesn't stop. And with the finds that keep going on, like look, they found the Elvis, that Torvosaurus that made the Allosaurus on steroids, shrunk to this lower, longer, meaner looking Carcharodontosaur type skull. That's being studied. The publication on that should be coming out in the next 700 days or so, if not sooner. Stegosaurus, Hesperosaurus. I mean, if you want to study something right now, hey, I'm in Arizonasaurus, Brandon. He's studying Stegosaurus. And there is so much stego material that's just sitting on shelf. I know where there's a juvenile. You're going to see it September 28th. It would be wonderful if someone studied it. It's half prepped. It's ready to go. But stegosaurs are hot. The whole armored, the Thyreophorans. Look at the ankylosaurs in the Morrison. So when I showed up in 94, they were just realizing that the ankylosaurs were hanging out in the Morrison. And I can promise you, you're going to go find ankylosaur bones in these collections, in the Carnegie collections, in the American Museum collections. If you're just looking for those bones and you just take the time to survey them and just ponder and open up all the drawers, because you never know what's been missed.
That's awesome. Sounds like there's some really crazy, exciting stuff.
Yeah.
I think we're coming up. We got about 20 minutes left.
Let's go to questions.
Yeah, let's go to questions. Looks like we've got quite a few. Let's try and get through as many as we can before we hit the end of the stream.
I can stay a little longer. I don't know if you can, but I'm good. Okay. So
yeah, I've got to go at about 6. So let's try and get as many questions as we can. Starting off with one of your biggest fans.
All right. So that paper makes me sad. In fact, I have a blog that it's close to being done where I dug ludicrously deep on this animal. I went and pulled up all the original Indian papers, or papers on the geology of India. The survey says, I don't even know if they identified the element right. I certainly don't trust the measurements. And until but that rock is friable. If you read the geology papers of that time, it's not their fault. They weren't paleontologists of the sauropod persuasion, and they're dealing with stuff that's almost like talcum powder blowing away in front of them. So kudos for them for finding it. I treat that one like I treat Amphicelius. In fact, maybe a little better. Amphicelius, I throw it out completely. I know it's got a Marapunisaurus, but after seeing how Charles Marsh enhanced, exaggerated what I thought were photos with scientific illustrations of all of the material, I can't trust anything that any of the old timers did in those monographs. So I can't even believe Cope's Amphicelius drawing anymore. So the same with that big beast out of India. I'm intrigued, but it's nowhere near the gigantic size that it's been played out to be. If anything, it'll probably end up, if we had the bone, it would be like the Ultrasaurus tabariensis, where it was thought to be this giant element, and it turned out it wasn't even the element they thought it was. So their humerus shrank to a tibia, and an ulna, and it all fell apart. So long story short, fascinating research, tough part of the field to work. It'd be neat to see somebody go out and formally prospect that area. So if anybody knows,
Man, that would be
line
awesome.
me up.
And it's nice having those original photographs that just resurfaced, but I wish we had the material.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to Archosaurian Dad. Based off of the new Titanosaur specimens, are there any more insight to their behavior and ecology?
Oh man. The short version is tune in tomorrow at Paleo Portals. I'm sure Daniel Vidal is going to talk a lot about behavior and ecology. So the answer is yes. And there's so much work going on because not only do we have the new breed of paleo that's using technology, 3D scans to manipulate the specimens to see about behavioral. Vidal just had a paper drop. I got it 2 days ago on sauropod mating and how could they mate. And he at least knows they didn't mate like crocodiles, which throw their leg over. So there is a lot from the behavior side. Ecologically, there is such a knowledge of ecology now in the world that the next generation of paleo folks are asking these. I'm the last author on a paper that's looking at the evolution of theropod clades across the Mesozoic. And they're thinking of it with ecological terms and thoughts. So yes, we could spend a whole bunch of time, and I know a lot of people I could point you toward, but there is a ton of cool stuff. Just stand by on that one. And what I like about those guys is the behavior and ecology. They've got marketing plans. They're not stamp collecting, arguing about suprapresic apophysio-laminar intricacies like I care about. They're talking about much cooler, less multisyllabic terms, and it's much more friendly to the masses. And I'm a mass. I eat popcorn a lot.
Nice. That's awesome. So look up Daniel Vidal's stuff.
Yes.
Okay, Prehistoric Rager, which sauropod do you think is most likely to surpass Sauroposeidon in terms of height and become the tallest animal that have ever lived?
So I don't think Sauroposeidon's neck went up all that high. And defining height's tough because are you talking, could it get up tripodal to reproduce and its neck straight up in the air, or maybe a mom rearing up? Or are we talking about tallest and it's like a giraffe walks around with its head this height? Anytime we get into those variables of height, that's why paleontologists, you'll see they only talk about height at the hips. That's the only variable you'll hear them talk about in a paper, because the hips are a height and that's the height that there are. So the rest of the animals like that, I don't see it. But Supersaurus's neck is ludicrously long, longer than any other sauropod neck, longer than the Mamenchisaurs, longer than Sauroposeidon. And Palexiosaurus is a legitimate taxon, if that matters. Just wait.
Awesome.
Great question, though. I love it.
Yeah. Okay. From Cassave.
I love this question.
How do you think sauropods would interact with other herbivores in their environment?
Elephants. I've lived in an Addo elephant park for a long time and lived in the field in the bush. And elephants do what they want, when they want, where they want, how they want, and every animal gets out of their way or suffers the consequences. So the little babies are like baby sea turtles. They're getting eaten by everything, so they're growing up really fast. But once they get a certain size, they're pretty much immune to everything but lightning. So nothing was going to take out an adult sauropod. It's just not going to happen. Theropods didn't work in packs, maybe a small family unit, but they certainly were not going to risk taking out a large sauropod. They just weren't. So sauropods would then roll up to other herbivores. Their biggest threat were other sauropods because, hey, I'm pretty big. So I suspect that they were able to size each other up and go, yeah, it's not worth it. It's not worth the challenge today. So I think that stegosaurs, ornithopods, they ate at different heights. So like a giraffe, it's always fun when you go into Africa and you see the leaves are cut off right at the heights that the giraffes can eat. So I'm sure that The down low, outside of the diplodocids, those were left to the stegosaurs. Their teeth are all different. There's a staggering amount of plants. But I think that sauropods just kind of ignore once they got to a certain size, they're like elephants. They just did what they wanted to do. Getting to that size was tricky.
Nobody's going to stop them. Nobody can.
Watch an elephant. They are terrible. I watched one run through a tree and charged me, and I may have wet myself. I was terrified. This thing is trumpeting, and it's angry, and it's stomping. And I'm like, oh, dear goodness, I'm going to die.
And then you've got sauropods that are, 10, 20 times that size.
There are a herd of elephants in one animal.
It's crazy. Okay, another question from Luca Ricci.
Oh, great.
Saying this is family friendly as I can. How did large sauropods mate without breaking the female's back? Kind of going back to that other question.
Yeah, so Vidal's suggestion is possibly they just move their tails around, and then like some animals today, they just went cloaca to cloaca. Maybe they backed into each other, possibly. Or if you look at the sauropod pelvis, it is ludicrously wide and muscular and strong. So if it was a tripodal reach back and as gently as it could come down, that's another possibility. But more and more, I'm starting to think that they probably did some kind of tail touch as opposed to the traditional hop up. Just like how did the stegosaur? How do you even hop up with spikes or plates down the back? You're going to gut your gut. So there's got to be more than one method that they use to reproduce. Great family-friendly question, though. Absolutely awesome.
Awesome. Very well worded. Okay, next question. This is one that is actually very near and dear to my heart, and we don't really have an answer yet. But from Dino Flies, what is the actual possible maximum size for a sauropod, seeing as sauropods tend to be much larger than mammals?
So when you say size, there's length and there's weight. So length-wise, we're pushing. If we assume all three Supersaurus specimens are within a meter or so of each other in length, so to me, we now have the standard deviation. We know the length of an adult Supersaurus based on three specimens, all very similar in size, which means you could get 2, 3, 4, 5 standard deviations of size. So we don't know from a length standpoint, but it's going to be ludicrous. We're going to find, if we had every animal, we'd find 150 footers. Why not? If you look at your average Nile croc is what, 12 feet long, but they get up to 18 feet or so, 20 feet before we killed all the big ones off. It's quite a big difference. Or humans, I'm weight X, and one of my friends is weight X times 3. So it happens. And so when you get to weight, however, I think that there is, and you'd have to ask a biomechanicist this, there's got to be a maximum amount of weight hydroxyapatite can support, a bone's makeup. At some point, bones, even with all of the ligaments, tendons, musculature, keeping it all together, there should be some theoretical maximum where it'll just crunch under the weight. And I'm pretty sure nature doesn't get up to that level, but what that number is, I do not know, because if length's hard to calculate, weight is way harder. I know everybody's touting the new paper that just came out, but let's wait and see what the next generation of biomecanicists using machine learning and the computer engineering folks and all of the engineers with all of their knowledge, a couple of them are going to come over someday and explain to us how we should be thinking about it. Just like the Alvarezes did with the extinction event. You get these big leaps of knowledge from interdisciplinary studies, and I can't wait for that. But in the interim, the answer is I don't know and long. I know it's a cop-out, but I don't want to have it blow up on my face.
Yeah, I'm very excited to be able to share the research that I'm working on. I'm going to be presenting on it in February of next year at the Utah Conference for Undergraduate Research. I've only done a little bit of look into some biomechanical studies that actually have been done on that, but the answer is very, very big, much bigger than anything we've found so far.
Awesome.
I'm super excited to actually organize all this data that I'm collecting and be able to share it with everybody. Sweet. Okay, this is a super interesting question from Rhedosaurus. I heard that Apatosaurus and Brontosaurus could use their necks to judo chop attacking theropods. Could other sauropods like Alamosaurus and Brachiosaurus do this as well? I personally haven't heard of that behavior before.
I have not heard of it, but I assume they mean you could throw your arm forward and crunch something. The reality is if you're a smaller, think of an elephant with a giraffe neck and a tail that's longer. So you've got if you're being attacked, oh, I see the neck, like swing it from side to side, not their limbs. Why not? They had thick necks, big, thick beasts. The why not would be they also have cervical ribs running down the side. If you smack someone really hard, you could break that cervical rib and fracture it, and that's not good. And you've got all this pneumatic characters, the whole hollow neck. So though it's big and massive, I don't know what kind of weapon it was. A Apatosaurus, yes, I could see why, because it is extra, extra wide. Like a Supersaurus is fairly svelte. It's long, but it's not as wide as you think. And I would say Alamosaurus, I saw the cervical vertebrae in the Perot a couple months ago. Those things are offensive linemen. They're massive. All the diplodocids are little whippet greyhounds. They're cornerbacks in comparison. So could it use the neck in a pinch? If you've watched enough nature videos or been out in the wild, when it's your turn to die or live, you'll flail and throw everything in the world at it. So absolutely, if it spun around and could smack it, if it got the animal on the ground and stomped on it, it's lights out. Or hit it with its tail. I've seen lots and lots of fractured vertebrae over the years in the tail. We know they were doing things with that tail. And I wouldn't be surprised if they were using it in part as a weapon, which would be a really dangerous thing because their pelvies are the size of a car and all the musculature and power they generate. I love the question. Once I thought about the neck, is it, just to swing around like that Barosaurus behind me and clear the field of marauding Allosaurus.
Yeah. It's like getting hit by a living battering ram. It's like an Ankylosaurus on steroids.
Great question. Thank you.
Okay, from Trent Stacy, how many calories would the largest sauropods need to eat every day just to live? So basal metabolic rate.
Yeah, so I actually have a number for that. It's going to take me too long to find it. I did a presentation on that, and it really depends on what model are you using. Are they warm-blooded, if you will? Are they gigantohomiotherms and they're burning calories because of the heat, or because they're not burning calories because their heat is coming off from the fermentation of plants? Were they on the crocodilian side of calories? So the answer is I put up, like, I figured out how many blizzards, like large blizzards from Dairy Queen, they could eat if they were on the, and then I put how many they could eat if they were on the other side. And the punchline is, it is a ridiculous amount of calories. My thought is they ate incessantly. This over my my left shoulder is a skull, a CM11161, the Apatosaurus skull we scanned, a CT scan a couple months ago. That thing was eating constantly. I'm very convinced that its whole life was eating. She woke up, started eating, and then ate until it went to sleep, and then did it again.
That actually brings us to our next question from Rhedosaurus. How did giant sauropods sleep?
So I suspect they just stood there, the biggest one. I mean, because getting up, if you lay down and you're 100 feet long, you're much more at risk. So I wonder if they slept like some big mammals. I don't know the answer to that. I've never studied it mechanically to see biomechanically how difficult is it. You know what? We'll ask Daniel tomorrow. Did they habitually lay down and get up? But I suspect, since they're graviportal and they have that massive midsection and their osteological neutral pose is horizontal, like you see there, that just hung out there. Maybe they had some structure. I don't know. It's a wonderful question. I've thought about it, but I've never researched it. So I would be making something up. But it's a wonderful question. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, it looks like we actually have a theropod question. What is this about Mega Allosaurus? Sorry, I know sauropods are the focus, but I'd like to know the stance of Saurophagonax.
Go to my blog, fossilcrates.com. There's a blog. I went and studied Saurophagonax, aka snacks. I actually have 2 casts in my backyard that I need to mount. So if any of your museums want mount, we're in skeletons. Snacks is legit. It's a valid genus. It's not Allosaurus. I used to think it was. I went to Oklahoma and looked at it. It's legit. And it's got parasagittal laminae in the dorsal vertebrae. And it has chevrons that look like Tyrannosaurus. So that was the interesting side note. So now the question is, well, are these other, so Brontoraptor or whatever Bacher named that critter, it's a Torvosaurus. So Torvosaurus, I used to think was as big as snacks, but it turns out it's not. When you go element to element, essentially every element of snacks is larger than the Torvosaurus element. There's a number of snacks individuals, And someone should really study that material because it is amazing. And it's just, I don't know why it hasn't gotten the love that I would have expected. So the Mega Allosaurus is, if Epantarius, because I went and looked at that material way back when to make sure that it wasn't a sauropod, and it's not, it's clearly Allosaurus, big Allosaurus. If it's Allosaurus, well, then Allosaurus got to near snacks and Torvosaurus size. We think of Allosaurus as this medium-sized wolf. Well, if Epantarius is Allosaurus, then Allosaurus got big. Or is it a separate genus like Cope thought initially? Problem is the material's too scrappy to know for sure. Let's go find some more.
That's pretty exciting. Okay, it looks like we probably just have time for maybe another 2 questions.
Okay.
One from Jay. You mentioned Tyranotitan kills Spinosaurus about 7 out of 10. When was this?
I don't know. That's a part of our Chulai Championship. So we had a whole thing for a couple of years where when COVID shut down March Madness, we made Chulai Championship, and we had all these fantasy battles. So I had spreadsheets. We had a whole bracket. You signed up. You picked your winners. I announced you voted. Everyone voted for their winners, and then we had pre-game and post-game videos. I was learning how to use Camtasia. It was a hilarious event. We did it 3 seasons. We didn't do it this year for a variety of logistical reasons, but that's where that's coming from. So let's pass that one because Tyranotitan's big. Spinosaurus doesn't have the kill bite strength of a Carcharodontosaur. Is the punchline.
Oh, that's awesome.
But yeah, it's if you go back
so
and watch our YouTube videos, my kids say they're cringy. I enjoyed them.
Okay. Last question from Paleo Stories. Couple of questions. What's the material we have for Supersaurus, and what's the new paper Brian is working on? This question is by Paisley. Tell him I said
Paisley. Yeah, so the new material too, we talked about it earlier. We've got a whole bunch of new vertebrae of Supersaurus, a bunch of different elements, working on the osteology of Supersaurus to put it out there to compare and contrast with the other animals, to just give us a baseline. And really, that's the springboard into our Barosaurus untying that knot. And we have what I call the Sauro Squad. It's John D'Angelo, Colin Boisvert, Matt Wadle, Ray Wilhite, myself. And then we bring in guys like John Foster. So we've got a bunch of Sauropod guys that I work with. I'm like, let's all work together and solve this mystery of what's going on here. And there's others, but that's who's in the crew right now.
It's fantastic. Awesome. Well, this has been an incredible discussion. I know I've had a ton of fun. I'm pretty sure everybody else has as well. I'd be super down to do something like this again. I don't know about you.
Done. Tell me we can do it tomorrow. Just tell me when.
Awesome.
Yeah, you let me know. I'll make the time, and we'll see you tomorrow on Paleo Portals. For everyone else out there, it's absolutely a pleasure to just be able to share my rambling stories. Come to paleoportals.com if you want to talk directly with both of us in an environment where we can see you, you can see us, and we can chat. Also, if you come down to Arizona, the Arizona Museum of Natural History, we have a beautiful museum with lots of cool things on display. So reach out to me on social media or just email Brian at Fossil Crates if you're ever in town. It's always fun to come out of the lab and go see cool, take people on paleo tours every once in a while and show off neat things. But it has been a true pleasure and honor to have met you at the university, SUU. Pretty cool. Glad it's a project. And your channel, it does wonderful work, disseminating science in the way you do, allowing us a platform to talk about erudite things that I've done, as well as general topics. Your conveyance, your what you work, it's a 2 thumbs up. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to say the same to you. Thanks for putting on Paleo Portals. Everybody who's watching, I strongly encourage you to sign up for it if you can. Super awesome opportunity. We just get to hang out with paleontologists and talk for hours about all their specialties. It's super awesome.
There's one other thing. I know we're out of time, but we have a new virtual Tyrannosaurus Rex coming to a museum near you. If you have an iPhone, you can go download Famous Fossil to get the taste of it. It's our virtual Psittacosaurus. It's a mixed reality, but our new one is going to be headset friendly, and it'll scare you. It's a life-size, better than Hollywood, accurate T-Rex that we've commissioned as part of virtual displays. So your museum doesn't have a T-Rex, but we can try to get them one. And if they do, well, let's have it run around. So we've got lots of tech coming as well. So stay tuned with Fossil Crates. Join us as a subscriber. Check out our website. We sell cool casts, and watch our papers. We've got lots of Sauropod stuff coming out.
Awesome. That sounds incredible. Thank you so much, Brian, and thank you everybody who came to the stream. Have a good
Adios.
one.